Hello everyone, my name is Alba and I'm here in the Janome studio at Janome headquarters in New Jersey. Today I'm going to be talking to you about making a Quillow. And many of you may be saying, Quillow, what is a Quillow? So I'm going to show you a little bit of what a Quillow is and how I came up with this method. But to let you know, a Quillow, this is a Quillow we will be making. And you may be looking at me going, Alba, this is a pillow. Is that New Jersey accent of yours that I can't understand you? No, this is actually a Quillow. And what a Quillow is a pillow with a surprise inside that there's a quilt or a blanket inside. And I'm going to show you just how wonderful that is. And there's actually 3 ways that you could use or display this. So right now you see way number 2. I could show half of my focus fabric, half of my throw, and on the other side is all that one fabric. I could also flip this around and show you way 3. And I'm going to be doing this several times. And that is that the back is all one fabric and the front is all one fabric. Now I said that this was a quilt or a throw hidden in here. And normally the way traditional Quillows were done was just like this. One fabric on the front, one fabric on the back, with the quilt hidden inside. And what I didn't like about this is how messy this end gets and that quilt half falls out. So I got 3 different instructions or methods of doing this, and I kind of morphed them and turned them into something different. So here is my pillow portion that is on my throw. And I'm going to show you, this is a large throw. You probably won't get all of it seen in there. And this is a throw that was purchased. Now this can be done. You'll notice I did not give sizes. I did not give any instructions for the throw part, because a throw part could be any size and any type. Now, as I said, this was a purchase throw, and I simply added that pocket to it. This could be a quilt that you have already completed, that is bound, quilted, completed. This could be taken from a UFO. And if your quilt is not bound yet, you do want to secure those edges. Now, I said that this does not matter what size your throw is. And that's true. I am going to show you how to adapt this and how to measure to make this any size. Now, the fabric that I am using today, I want to give a special thank you to Shannon Fabrics, because they provided me with the fabrics that I am going to be using. And I wanted to show you what I am going to be working with today. This is Shannon Fabrics Luxe Cuddle. If you've never worked with this, you'll see that this has almost like a fur-like feel and touch, and it is just super yummy. So allow yourself at least an extra hour to just cuddle and play with the fabric, because I know you will. I know I did, at least. So this fabric is one-sided where it is fabric. It's almost like a knit interior. And that top side that is that furry luxe cuddle fabric. So with this, what I did for the one that I am going to be using today, I used 2 yards for the front, 2 yards for the back. And when you are doing pieces of fabric like this with a fleece, a cuddle, a minky, anything like that, you're going to double up your fabric with right sides together. You're simply going to sew all around those edges and leave an opening to turn it inside out. And what I did with that is I then sewed all around. Now there's lots of embellishing opportunities. This is another throw that I purchased. And what I really liked about this one, it had a spot naturally to add embellishment. This could be embroidery, this could be couching, this could be an applique added in there, this could be letters spelling out a message, and this one was also a pre-purchase throw. And what I like about these is that they are double-sided, so they have that beautiful feel to them on the right side and the wrong side of that fabric. I'm going to just put those aside. Today, I'm going to be working with this right here. And as I said, this is the Shannon fabric, Luxe Cuddle, and it is just super, super luxurious. It has that feel of that super, super soft teddy bear stuffed animal that's incredible. But here you will see where I've already sewn up the edges. And I am going to show you the most important part of doing this, and that is folding it to get the measurements for the fabric for that pillow. Now, on this particular piece, I have a longer side and a shorter side. So if yours is rectangular, remember to fold with that longer side up. So the first thing I am going to do is fold in half. And I have the unfolded edges to my left side. And I am going to fold in half again. And I am leaving the folded edges on top and that single piece of fabric towards me. And now I am going to fold in half again, and I'm going to even that up. Now at home, I recommend doing this on a table to make this a little bit easier for you to see what I'm doing. I'm holding it up in the air. And I am going to fold yet again in half. And the one thing that you need to have happen is on one side you need a single layer of fabric, and I'm going to hold that up. One side a single layer of fabric, and the opposite side all of the folded edges. And of course, when you're home, you're going to do this a little bit neater than I just did. The joys of being live. And I am going to place that folded blanket, and I'm just going to neaten her up a little bit on the table. I want to go over the supplies that you will be using, and they're really basic. You need a machine to sew on, and all we're doing is straight stitching, so any machine will work on this. I happen to be working on the Continental M7. If you have a walking foot, the walking foot will make this process much, much easier. I have an ironing mat, and on the opposite side of this ironing mat is my cutting mat. You could use that as two separate pieces or all in one like I have. A ruler, a rotary cutter, a scissor, a measuring tape, and some pins for when we get started. So I am going to put my supplies aside, and now we're going to go to the measuring portion of making our Quillow. So here I have my Quillow, and it is all my blanket, which is all folded up. So I'm just neatening this up a little bit because I was folding not on a flat surface. Mine got a little away from it. So you will notice that my Quillow is rectangular in shape. Now, your blanket or whatever you are using for that main portion, when you fold it up, it may be square or it may be rectangular. If it's square, you do not need to worry about where you're measuring from. But if you have a rectangular piece like I do, it will. Now, the first measurement that we're going to take is from the table, above the hump of the blanket, back down to the table. And if your piece is rectangular, you are going to do this on the narrow side. So I am going to put my tape measure and I'm going to go all around that, and I'm going to let that go so you see where that is. Now mine in particular measures 22 inches. To this measurement, I am going to add 2 inches for ease. So that gives me my first dimension of 24 inches for my pocket. Now we're going to take our second measurement, and I'm going to turn this around so that you could see that a little bit better. And now the measurement I'm going to take is going around, up and over. And this measurement I'm doing on the long side. If your folded blanket or Quillow is rectangular. If it's square, it really won't matter which side you're measuring on. And this one for me measures 45 inches. And I am adding 8 inches for my overlap in the pillow. So that will give me a measurement of 24 by 54. So once I am done with that, we magically have 2 pieces of fabric cut to those dimensions. And this will be your pillow. Now, these fabrics can be the same. They can be different. A lot of times I like to do this with coordinating fabrics, and sometimes I will get 4 different prints and sew 2 together for the front and 2 together for the back. As long as after they're sewn, they come out to the measurements that we just got from going around that blanket, it will work fine. I think this would be lovely with some leftover quilt blocks, something of that sort, and this could be a pieced area as well. So it really doesn't matter what your fabrics are, as long as they take on that measurement. Now, on the narrow measurement, I went from table around the hump, back to the table, and we added 2 inches to that measurement. On the long side, I went from underneath completely around, and we added 8 inches to that measurement. So here I have my piece, 24 by 54. Now on one of my pieces, I had to seam my 2 pieces together. I don't want this being my focus fabric that will show. So we're just going to have to remember that the darker of my 2 fabrics is the one that I do not want to be the focus. With our 2 pieces of fabric, I am going to place them right sides together. And I am going to sew all around the 4 edges, leaving an opening so that I could turn this inside out. You could do that seam allowance anywhere from 1/4 of an inch to 1/2 an inch that I've allowed for that. So let me sew this. And I want you to sew at a speed that's comfortable for you. I'm just slowing that down a little bit. I often forget that that Continental takes off at that 1600 stitches per minute. And we are going to sew all around all 4 edges. Pin if you need to. And don't forget to reinforce those corners because we're going to be poking and pulling on these often. And remember all 4 sides and leave an opening. Now, I am using a size 14 needle because I'm going to be going through a lot of thicknesses, and I am on default settings for my stitches. I'm using a contrasting thread just for the fact so that you could see where I'm stitching as we get to more details. But I would definitely complement your fabric. And I'm using an all-purpose thread. And I'm just about done. And don't forget, leave that opening. So I'm going to be leaving about 5 inches. Just so I could get my hand in and out of this and be able to turn it inside out. So there we have our sewn piece, and I'm leaving that opening. And now we're going to turn this inside out. So what this is, it's almost like a really large pillowcase. And with the corners, we're going to snip those corners so that when you turn it inside out, that will turn beautifully. And you're going to do that on all 4 corners. Do not cut into your thread where you have just sewn. And let's turn this inside out. Now on mine, I am going to just finger press, but I do recommend that at home you press this all nice and flat. And I'm going to poke out my corners. You're going to hear me say that often. Don't forget to poke out your corners. And what you're going to do with this now is press. And as I said, I'm going to give this a quick finger press. But we're going to press all of our edges nice and flat. Making sure that our corners are nice and flat. On the opening on the top, I am pressing that, and you can either hand stitch that sewn, use some fusible web to seal that, or stitch that closed. And again, I'm making sure that all my edges are sewn nice and flat so that when we top stitch and sew this to the Quillow, it will lay beautifully. And I am sewing shut that opening that I left where I turned inside out. Now, I don't recommend using this high contrast thread, but I like to do this on live so that you can see where I'm sewing, and when I show you what I'm doing, you can actually see, where if I match the threads, you would not be able to see that. So I have done a quick stitch on the top, closing that opening, and what I have now is a very long pillowcase. So I am going to show you now. Remember how I said with the Quillow, how we fold this was important, and it's the same thing with the pillowcase. There was one side where we had a single piece of fabric. Single piece of fabric. And I'm going to just get rid of that loose thread there that's bothering me. And this is where our pillowcase is actually going to get sewn on. Now, when we place this very long piece down, the fabric that I want to show and be visible on the Quillow needs to be face up. I am going to locate the center of this, and I'm just going to fold in half, and I am going to give that a quick finger press. You can do this by marking with a pin. You can actually fold a crease, but here I have where my center is. Now remember, on that long measurement, I added 8 inches. And the reason I did that is for an overlap. So here is my center, and I am going to overlap about 3 to 4 inches. So I am going to go for my center with 4 inches. My eyeball measurements were beautiful. And I am going to get my pins. Now, for those of you who know me, know I rarely pin. This is one time where you really want to pin. And I want to make sure that those overlapping pieces stay in place. And I'm going to get the other side and also overlap 4 inches. And I am going to pin in place. I want to make sure that when I sew this down, I do not lose any of those edges. And I am going to pin also on the opposite side where I have that overlap. And I'm really paying attention to that overlap, that my edges are nice and even, and that everything is nicely in place. And you may want to add more pins to this. So now we're going to place this on our folded blanket. And I am going to place those overlapped pieces face down, and we are going to put this right there, matching up corner to corner. And I am just going to place a pin here, and it's just to hold it in place, because when I open this up and I lay this flat on my table, and it is really helpful to have a big sewing surface, and I'm just going to lay that flat. Now I can really pin this in place, but that one pin I put in there just helped me to keep my orientation nice. Now I want my folds to be on one edge, and I need one edge to be a fold. So one corner is getting my overlapped, one corner is getting a fold. And I am just going to keep that in place. Now, when I pin this, I can go right to the edge. But remember that that is the thickest portion of your quilt. For this one in particular, I can go right to the edge. But if you're using a traditional quilt for this and you have binding, what I recommend is going in so that you're laying the fabric right along where that binding would be, or in this case, the hem would be. So I'm going in about 1/2 inch. And now I am going to pin this in place. So you could see with all of these layers, this is why I recommended a walking foot. Because when you're going through all of those thick layers, it can be really difficult to keep everything secure. And I'm paying really close attention to add enough pins in that overlap, because I do have quite a few layers of fabric. So I have the 6 layers of my pillow, plus the doubled over portion of my blanket underneath. And I'm just making sure that the folded over flap. Now, why am I telling you to be very cautious with that folded over flap? I made one or two of these where I had to get out that seam ripper because that folded over fabric did not get caught in my seam, and I don't want you doing that same thing. Now we are going to sew. I'm making sure everything lays flat. The edge where the folded over flap is, the bottom edge of the pillow coming up to the side, leaving that opposite corner open. So one corner is getting sewn, one corner is being left open, and that opened corner is a folded edge of fabric. And I'm going to, people who know me know I rarely use pins. So this is something that really does need to be pinned in place and secured, because it is really easy for this to move around on you. And I am just finishing up with another couple of pins. Perfect. Now, when I do sew this on, I like to do a double line of sewing. I like to do one line of sewing right on the edge to top stitch it down, and then a second line around that. So it will look almost like a twin needle, but I do not recommend using a twin needle with all of this bulk. So I am just going to position. And did I say it's very helpful to have a big surface? You'll notice that I put my M7 drop down into my table, making it very easy. And I'm making sure again, and I'm actually going to fold that over so I do not sew the edge that I need to leave open. So I'm going to sew, sew, and sew, leaving that top corner or my pocket. And let me bring this to my machine. There. That extra high lift comes in so handy. I am reinforcing that edge. And actually, after it's completed, I like to go over that corner with a bar tack stitch. And those are one of the stitches in that buttonhole area. And when I'm doing my top stitching, I placed my pins away from the edge of the fabric so that I can continue sewing without pulling those pins out, so that I could get that top stitching done very nicely and very evenly. When I do my second layer of stitching, I'm going to give you a couple of tips to getting that nice and even. And I'm now turning my corner. And I'm laying the bulk of this on my lap so that I could sew nice and straight. But when you're working with something big like this, and you're manipulating, the pins are vital. And now I'm on the second side of the pillow. And I am so tempted to stop sewing and just play with this luscious fabric. And as I'm sewing, you're seeing that I'm making sure I'm keeping everything nice and straight. And I'm just letting the machine do the work. That walking foot does make it a whole lot easier. And I'm going to add some of that extra weight so it does not pull into the throat of the machine. So if you are working with a larger Quillow like I am, you may want to choose your full-size machine so that you have that nice throat space. And the reason I chose the M7 is because of that 13.5 inches of space that I have. And I'm just going to get my pin cushion out of the way. And now I'm going on the third and final side that I need to sew. Perfect. And I'm just making sure, again, that my fabric is nice and even. This is a great, quick and easy gift that even if you bought a throw, it's a great way to personalize it. And you could always add a lot of embellishment to this. You could add applique, embroidery. For those of you who have your edge cutters, you could do something with that and add to this. Perfect. Now, I have the 3 edges that have been sewn. And now I can remove my pins. I am going to leave the one up top where I folded as a hint to me, do not sew this edge. And the reason I do this is because I have done that. And I just wanted to avoid that same mistake that I made. And I'm removing my pins because this has been sewn in place. And on this gray fabric, it is tough to see the thread, but I did use that turquoise thread to try and help so you could see where I'm stitching. And I went right along the edge. And now what I'm going to do is I am going to use the opening of my foot to help me do another row of stitching on this. So I like to double stitch this. Now, what I am doing is I am placing that previous sewn stitch. My needle is in the center position. My previous sewn stitch on the edge of my foot. And by doing that, I am going to get a perfectly even spaced double stitching. So just a nice tip with doing that double stitching. I like to do the double stitching just to reinforce this. You saw that when I turn this inside out, you really tug on this, and it's holding a lot of weight, especially with this furrier type of fabric. And this is the Luxe Cuddle that I'm using. I had this set up to be a gift for someone, but I really think this is going to be mine. I'm just picturing myself with my fireplace going on my couch, with a book in hand and this warm, luscious, cuddly fabric. So I don't think it's going to get gifted. I think this one's going to be a gift for me. And again, you want to brace the weight of your fabric so it is not pulling against your machine. I'm bracing this both on the throat of my fabric and on my lap. If you're getting a lot of pulling against your machine, you may wind up with skip stitches. Now on my thread, I matched my upper thread to the color of my blanket and my bottom thread to this color of the backing because one is very dark and one is very light. So when your blanket does have two colors, just be cautious and be aware of the color differences as you're making your thread choices. And I'm on side 2 of my double stitching. And I'm going to turn that corner. And what I'm doing is I am lining up my fabric, that previously stitched line, with the outer edge of my foot, so that my double stitching is nice and even. And I'm making sure that I'm not catching the layers of the fabric where I have a bump, and I'm pulling out my pins. I noticed I left 2 in there. And I'm doing that double stitching all around that pocket. And I'm going to reinforce those corners by back tacking. So here we have where our pocket was sewn onto the Quillow. And now comes the important part, folding it so that this all comes together. What we are going to do is I need the long edges on top and my pillow portion at my left foot. So I'm holding a long piece and I am going to fold in half. Again, my pillow is at my left hand foot. The folded edge is at the right side. And I am going to fold in half. And what you have is one long strip with the main portion of that pillow pocket down at the bottom. Now we're going to get the long strip, fold in half. And that looks about right. I'm going to come over to the table. So I have my pillow at the bottom, my fabric at the top, and I'm going to fold in half again. Now you want to do this as neatly as you can at home. And now comes the fun part, the Quillow part. So what you're going to have is one edge is that opening that we left with that fold. And we're now going to show you, I'm going to show the 3 different ways that you can display this. So I am going to reach in and I am going to pull that blanket around and into that pocket. There we go. And I have my Quillow in there. And what I want you to pay attention to are the corners. I'm reaching my hand in and I'm poking out those corners. And I'm going to tell you over and over again, reach in and pull out those corners. So this is the first way to display your Quillow. I have 2 fabrics. And this is the fabric that was folded, that the edge was towards the table. Now I want to show some of that focus fabric, that lighter color that I had face up. So I'm going to reach in, I'm grabbing that corner and I'm turning. Now my back side is my two-tone and my front side, and I'm going to poke out those corners, is part Cuddle, part fabric or pillow. And I'm not paying attention to my own instruction. We're pulling out those corners. Now that's way number 2 to display. Two-tone, two-tone. Now the third way I could display this is to poke out and turn that other flap. So now what I have is all one fabric on one side and the same fabric on the back side. And I'm just going back in and I'm getting those corners. But look at how beautiful that Quillow finishes out. I have my nice overlap on the back. I have a solid fabric on the front. And wouldn't this be wonderful to embellish, add embroidery, applique, some couching, just so many different things that you could do with that. Again, I really enjoyed my time with you, and I hope that you post pictures of the Quillows that you make. I would love to see all the different variations that you come up with. So I hope you enjoy this project as much as I did. I know when I shared this with my coworkers here at Janome headquarters, they were like, it's wonderful, it's magical. No one would ever know that you're hiding your quilt inside of this. That nice, luxurious quilt. Thank you for joining me, and we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.